Steve, I'm so thankful for you coming on the show. And I think the first question is like, when I saw your LinkedIn, you were the president, CPO for large manufacturing companies. Would love to go more in depth into like what you did and your experience building these things.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I've started my career working for large enterprises, and I went through a journey where, after 10 years, I was in consulting, what now is called Accenture, at the time. Did a lot of sort of early sort of tech consulting when I got out of college, and that was the new thing was putting in ERP systems, enterprise resource planning. So today, they're just think of them as big business systems that run companies, and it's still a huge market for that, but it's changed a lot. So I kind of cut my teeth originally in big enterprise. I worked in for oil and gas companies. I was as a consultant with Accenture, moved around to a lot of different opportunities, banking, utilities. It was just kind of the strange sort of early walk that I had in learning about how businesses run, but more from the lens of a consultant. And then the whole time I'd always been an entrepreneur, and you know to I had this calling to be an entrepreneur, to start my own, or be involved in a company. And then that's what happened. So, well, I'm maybe skipping a step. I went to work for a software startup for about 4 years that did really well. It was in the enterprise software space, a company called Ariba, and it's now part of SAP. But then I went to my own journey sort of as an entrepreneur. I co-built a company that was in the industrial tech space called Air Motion Systems. That's where I got to be a CEO. Really from in the beginning a startup, but we were a niche market company, so we were in a huge industrial space, selling into mostly the printing and packaging industries around the world. And we came up with UV technology that UV is used uh, to basically do all the curing of high-end packaging inks and coatings, and it's used in a lot of industrial processes too. So we built up a company that way, but we eventually were acquired, which I'm getting back to your question. About 7 years ago, we were acquired by, we came together. It was a mutual decision to go together with a much larger competitor of ours. They do a lot of different things. And so then I found myself back in a enterprise, a multi-billion dollar enterprise environment. And more recently, what I was doing was the chief product officer of digital services, was looking after kind of for a global manufacturing company. How do we create strategies using when we say digital technology? So it could be anything, it could be software, hardware, but mostly strategies to grow and innovate. One of the big ones was industrial Internet of Things, for machines, and that was a big area of focus of mine the last few years. I've always been drawn to kind of software and innovation, but the real thing was then I sort of discovered, like a lot of people did, what was happening with AI, and it about 18 months ago this thing hit the scene, and it really changed everything in terms of thinking. That led me to where I am today, which is back being an entrepreneur again, building Imagine AI Labs. So that's a like a long answer to a short question, I think, but it gives you a little bit of a flavor.
And that's how I met you. Connected me. One of the first questions that I'd like to ask is like, what when you built your startup, how did you know this idea was it? Like, what were the parameters, or how do you go about deciding this idea is not it and this idea is it?
Yeah, okay. Probably the better one so far, but like, I mean, I could talk a little bit about what we're doing today, but let me back up to the first real entrepreneurial experience I had, and that was leaving. At the time, I had left Accenture, and then I'd gone into software, and gone in with a really great startup called Ariba that's now was later acquired by SAP. And I kind of got burned out with the sort of the corporate. I mean, we were working hard, we were having a lot of success, but I really had this calling to be an entrepreneur. Uh, well, a lot of life is like who you know. It's it's how you know who you know. And there was a guy that I had met. He was essentially connected, or I knew him through my wife. He had gone to college with her and her group of friends, and is a guy named Hans Euland, and he was really innovative. The day I met him, and we were young guys. We were probably older than you, but we were still pretty young at the time. We were in our early 20s, and I remember meeting him a couple of times, and I'm like, oh, we just resonated with each other. We just he had an entrepreneurial spirit. I had an entrepreneurial spirit, and we were both trying to sort of put ideas together. We actually were at that time. It was really popular to open brew pubs. Microbrewing in the United States was like a new trend, and this we're talking in the '90s. So this is like this would have been we had all kinds of plans. We were going to open up the greatest one, and we were both from the Midwest United States, so Chicago, Milwaukee, the fertile ground for that kind of a business. But we had no idea what we were doing. We just had a dream. We just had this idea. Well, it turns out we never acted on that. Now we spent a lot of time in brew pubs, coming up with ideas. But he had gone into an equipment sales role right out of college for an industrial tech in the printing and packaging industry. Um, and he knew the space. So he had gone in, he had just sort of stumbled into it. He'd always been in sales, this guy was one of these guys you'll meet in your life that could sell ice to an Eskimo. And it's he was so good. He was a natural at it. He could have sold anything. In fact, before that, he was selling used cars, and he learned a lot about the selling process from selling used cars to people. And this is when he was younger, but he brought that into the industrial tech world. And then he and another guy had been importing equipment out of Germany for the United States packaging and printing market. And what they were importing were these giant drying systems that go into, you imagine, I don't know if you've ever seen a very large industrial printing press, like a Heidelberg press, or, if you ever go to a big print company, you'll see these things. They have multiple color units, 6, 7 colors, and then they coat things. So all the products that you see in the stores, when you see the shiny packaging for everything from toothpaste to golf ball sleeves, to health and beauty, it's all over the place. When you see the shiny packaging, the equipment that my partner, my soon to become partner, was selling was the technology that would help cure the inks or dry the inks and the coatings that make that packaging pop. And it was a new field back then, so it was UV. It was the new technology. He knew that space. I didn't know anything about the printing space. I knew a lot about, I was working with Accenture before that. I knew a lot about software and technology and business and how to run a business. And, with Ariba, I learned a lot about the whole, B2B space, e-commerce, supply chain, all that stuff. And so, when we got together, he and his other original co-founder were looking for an investor, they're looking for a partner. And I had just come off my first experience with my company, SAP Ariba. So I was about 10 years into the workforce. We had done an IPO at Ariba. Ariba was a company that was one of the very first successful B2B e-commerce companies. So this is probably history lessons. I don't know if they teach this in history classes anymore, but the first wave of
They
internet,
don't.
yeah, the first wave of the internet was, basically B2C, business to consumer e-commerce. Netscape was the company that invented the browser. When that happened, the world changed. That was one of the seminal moments in our history, and it was one of it happened when I was probably in my mid to late 20s, about 94, 95. And Netscape changed everything. So all businesses started focusing on the internet as a way to think about business. Well, consumers got there first. So people were browsing the internet and going to different websites, and companies like Amazon were being born. But my company, Ariba, built one of the first business to business platforms. So it was a supply chain sort of e-procurement type platform that was all based on internet technology. It was one of the very first ones. And when Ariba went public, and this was around 1999, um, the company grew, I think by a year later, hit like a $40 billion valuation. Now, think about that for a second. I
Wow.
can't do the math while I'm talking, but $40 billion market cap, and this was 24 or 25 years ago. You imagine that would be like an 80 to $100 million market cap company now. So I suddenly was one of the earliest employees of a internet startup that went full scale all the way up, hit 40 billion. At one time, Ariba was worth more than General Motors from a market cap standpoint. And then, like everything, thing is rhythm. So you go up, just as sure as you go up, you go down. And then when the market busted all the internet stocks got hit around, was it 2000, late 2000, 2001, this crash set in. And there were just too many companies, and they all got taken down. The hype and the expectations were way too high for the reality of where things actually were. And so, anyways, but I had a nice run. I had a 4-year run. Was able to take a little nest egg, out of that experience. More money at that time than I knew what I was ever going to do with. But started thinking about following my own dreams and getting into my own thing, and that's what drew me to the business partner I met, Hans Euland, who was a friend initially. We were talking about brew pubs, and we just wanted to do something together. And then when I had my moment, I could exit Ariba. Uh, in fact, I'd already done it. I'd already made an investment in the company they had founded. They had created what we called AMS, or air motion systems, he and another guy, to go after this opportunity to create UV technology in primarily in the printing and packaging space. Again, which I knew nothing about. But I had a lot of confidence at that age, and I knew that, okay, well, there's technology there, there's software there, they're selling to enterprises and businesses. I know that I had experience in that, and I was in my early 30s, and we need to build a company, and I know a little bit about software that runs companies, so I can help with that. And over the years, I got pretty good at pitching ideas and technology and so forth. So we came together and we started building. We started losing money right away, but we started winning too. We started selling and then losing and selling because we didn't really know the economics, the unit cost economics. None of that stuff made sense, but we just kept persevering at it. And we started to get, at that time, I think your question was, how did we know this was the right thing to do? So and my original answer, the way I started off by was saying was that this was a person that already knew a market, and he had a lot of talent. Hans Euland, this my first business partner in this venture, and so a lot of it was that I trusted him, but I also verified. I remember at one point before I wrote the investment check, I said I need to talk to some of your early customers because they only had like 2 or 3 customers they could reference at that point, and I remember talking to, of course, there's another thing I can come back to later. That's an old truth. If you buy something, you're typically going to stand by it, regardless of how it sucks, or not. Anyways, but I talked to a guy that was one of his first customers for AMS, and it was a printer in the Milwaukee area. Are you familiar with Pokemon? I'm sure you guys know everything about. They were one of the
Yes.
top printers
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Pokemon, the little Pokemon, what did they call them? The tokens, or I forget what they
Cards?
call it. Cards. It wasn't so much cards back then. It was these are little, like, they look like poker chips or something, but they each had the characters on them. Well, this printer was printing on plastic, wafers, so to speak, Pokemon characters, and they had to print on plastic. It's the hardest substrate material to get ink to stick to. So you have to use UV for that process. Typically, it's very hard to do it otherwise. So they became the first customer, and I remember having a reference call with this guy. His name was Rob Dunk. I still remember it, and I don't know if he's still with them. And I remember him telling me, yeah, he's their first customer. In fact, he gave them a lot of the early product requirements. So this is a great note. So the earliest customer gave Hans and the other guy at that time, that was our lead engineer, gave them the requirements of everything that would solve his biggest problems. So he had been running the UV process. He'd been using equipment out of Germany, which was the only other place you could really find the high-end UV systems. And Germany is where most of well, not all of them, but a lot of the printing presses come from Germany and Japan. But anyways, the requirements were so tight, and the UV systems were notoriously bad. These are electromechanical systems. They run at high voltages, very high power. They have to be liquid cooled, air cooled. What you want to do is prevent these big, powerful UV lights from burning the press, from catching something on fire. So most of the technology was on how do you engineer this thing so you can run a smooth process, and heat removal,
Mm.
and avoidance of electrical arcing. I mean, it was just crazy stuff, and that we had to do. Well, anyways, this customer, uh, the company was called Serigraph, and his name was Rob Dunk. He had tried every other UV system. There weren't a whole lot, but they were always down. And when a manufacturer experiences downtime, you imagine you just bought a printing press that cost $3 million, and then you bought a UV system that cost $500,000. You have to build that machine out. Like a manufacturer has to sell the capacity of that machine. So every hour that they're not running is costing them a huge amount of money that they're still having to pay for that machine, but they're not getting product out the door. And so downtime was really the big thing they were experiencing. And then of course all these changeover, all these little better mousetrap ideas, like, hey, wouldn't it be great if the third shift operator wouldn't have to call a maintenance if a UV lamp needed changing, because these lamps would last like 1,000 hours. If a UV lamp needed changing in the middle of the night, can we just make it so the operator, it's just like you would do it in your house. You just, pop out a bulb and put in a new one. Well, all the other systems at that time, you had to have an electrician on staff, to come in to do the change. It was very complicated. So, anyways, a lot of these
So you
ideas
guys
for the
really
product,
simplified the process.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but they came
Mm.
instead of us imagining what they might be. The customer literally just gave us or gave them this. If you can make a UV system that hits these marks, like it, and he goes, I'll buy it. And if he's going to buy it, they're one of the leading companies in this space that rely on this to do the Pokemon chips. Um, well, then other ones presumably can benefit from this. They're probably having the same struggles, and that was how we sort of found product market fit originally, was literally let the customer describe to us, and then through sort of intuition, and my partner Hans knew a lot of other people in the graphic space because they had been selling infrared hot air systems and other type of dryer, so he was very quickly able to validate that other customers would buy the technology too. And when I came along, all it took was one phone call to this guy. And he told me not only that he helped design it, so these were all features that he built in, he would absolutely invest in it again. And then he told me something really interesting, that he goes, Steve, UV is going to change our entire industry. And the global graphics industry, we can look this up, is one of the largest industries in the world. It's everywhere. And when you hear something like that, like, wait a second, like, okay, most people that interact with UV are people that go get their, women to go get their nails done in nail salons and things like that. But now you're talking about an industrial process that the whole world relies on, because the whole world consumes books and packaging and labels and all these other things that it's very beneficial for. And UV was relatively a pioneering technology back then, and it was very hard to work with, and so that really became okay. Now that's interesting. So this guy has problems we could solve. We've already begun to solve them with the first system that was delivered, and there's a huge market for it. And that was kind of, at least in that case, like how we knew it was the right thing to go do. And of course, there's nothing better than landing sales, closing deals to validate, your position. So we were actually, once we got the first couple of customers, our MVP done, we were actually very quickly able to sign orders for more equipment. And these are big ticket items. These are systems that would run $500,000 a piece. And so all you needed to do is sell, 10, 15 of them a year, and all of a sudden you had a multi-million-dollar business. And then the hard part was, how do we manufacture it at scale, to get the inefficiencies out, standardize things. That was all the other stuff we had to go do next.
So it was not like you just found the idea itself. It's more about first you find a really great partner and then using that partner.
Yeah, sort of to validate what you just said there, finding people, sort of, it's your network. Like, okay, who's got unique insights into that space? Because they'd been in that space. He had been in that space. I brought other skills to the table. And that was and then having the end customer describing. We had a speaker at the March Imagine AI Live conference in Las Vegas that did a really good job describing this. Imagine what sucks, and then what would it look like if things were great? And that's exactly what this customer is doing. Like, this is what sucks about my process. This is what great looks like, or when it doesn't suck. And then all you got to do is find a product that helps them get to stuff that doesn't suck. So that was kind of another way of going about it. But the way it led me to it, I would not have gotten into that opportunity had I not known Hans Uland. So it all goes back to who you know, how you know them, and what they're working on, and maybe there's a way, you guys you start resonating with another founder, and then you collectively bring your experience to bear.
And then how would you recommend, like, I'm trying to network as well. I'm young because I want to network is your net worth. That's one of the things my father also says that I try to follow it. How would you recommend young people right now, maybe specifically in the machine industry or just generally network?
Yep. And I say it's a very easy answer. Um, Go to conferences, but not just any conference. So this is another big hack, right? So most people online, you can get a great sort of network online, but there's something magical about an in-person event or an in-person, whether it's a small meetup that you're doing on a regular basis, or whether you're going maybe as a scholar. So we have scholarship passes to our events where you're literally plugging in and you're 10xing your network. Like but you're doing it in a way that you're also meeting people in real life. And there's nothing more powerful than the energy between human interaction. Like we still have a little bit of it with Zoom calls and things like this, but it's so much more powerful when you're in person. Example is like you can have hallway conversations with people. It's hard to do that when you're on a Zoom call. You can run into people in the bathroom. Oh, I've been trying to find or you can meet people in the after hours. And so I would say that one of the biggest hacks is find conferences that align with the interests that you have. Now, if you're building a business in a certain space, then absolutely go after those events. Not just maybe attend them, but if you're selling product into that space, take out scout them out and then maybe sponsor them. Take out get involved in them that way. Um, Volunteer to speak at events, volunteer to be at events, help the event organizers produce events. It's another hack that you'll find. That's a great way. And I always go back to this. It's it's more important. There's an old saying. It's not what you know, it's who you know. I'm sure you've probably heard that before. But I have another layer on that. It's how you know who you know, how you know them. That's the most important asset you can have. So how you know them is typically a shared experience you might have had. Maybe you had to maybe you went out all night with them once, or maybe you built something with them, or there's so many ways to get to know somebody, or you went on an adventure with them, or traveled with them. That's another great hack, especially in business, is go on trips with people, and how you know them, because then you're really connected at another level, and your ability to reach out to that network and say, hey, I got this idea or this thing, or who do you know, it just magnifies that scale. So I would very much encourage the hack is find conferences. And there's a lot of events that are one of my other favorite tactics is don't just go to conferences in your industry space. Find other events that are happening where you can cross pollinate. You meet people from different industries. Because one of the mistakes you can make, and we made it too, is we would stay in our industry swim lane. We were in printing and packaging and technology for that industry. So we would always end up talking to the same kinds of people all the time, even though it was a very large industry. You know, what if you were to go out and go to a different event for software and come back with those ideas? Or, could be sales and marketing, could be a mastermind event like a Peter Diamandis or a Tony Robbins event. There's all these other ways that you can plug into different networks, and they bring so much value back that you can typically put into the venture that you're working on and the market that you're into.
Another question is because I think my father also is in like the machinery industry, and I've always been very curious of maybe going into it. What would you say are some like misconceptions people have when they're trying to enter the industry, like how this industry works?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of it too, and this is some general sort of advice. So a lot of people might take an industry and say, okay, in the aggregate, is this industry interesting? Actually, one of the very first questions I ever asked my business partner at that time, Hans Eulen, was, is this industry interesting? Is it fun? And I remember now printing, you hear a lot about these days, printing is always structurally it's been in decline because nobody reads the newspapers anymore and, magazines, you know, it, there are a lot of parts of the industry that have changed a lot. But his answer was really interesting to me, and I always remember this. He said, printing is where the graphics industry, so art and creativity collide with manufacturing. And I thought that was a really interesting answer. And I always remember that. I said, okay, so this should be a fun industry. And I always was after, like, if I'm going to do anything, it ought to be, when they have the ability to create cool things and have fun. And that was something I found in that space. So that's one question I would ask is sort of what is the output of that industry? And when you think of industrial machinery, there's a lot of different, I mean, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, and there are a lot of different avenues of it. And then the other thing I would ask is what part of that industry is growing or could be disrupted? Because ultimately you want to ride a wave. You want to find the worst thing for a surfer, and I'm not a great surfer. I can barely get up on a surfboard, but I can imagine being a surfer. The worst thing to do is go out on your board and there's no waves, or they're just little tiny waves. And then you waste a lot of time waiting for waves. But your ability to sort of see momentum building and trends happening and then get on it like you're going to ride that wave all the way, and the goal is to ride the wave to the beach and then hopefully not wipe out. And then once you're on the beach, maybe go back, maybe there's another wave on that beach you want to catch again. um, but it's sort of a mental model that you can use for where is the wave in that market or that industry. Now, obviously, you can look at AI and say that's going to disrupt everything now. So every industry is going to be disrupted with some kind of an AI change or major disruption or automation. And to me, that's like incredibly exciting. Like this is there are like waves coming everywhere now, and there are different beaches. The beaches are the industries. Like what would be a great industry to be in that you might find interesting, and that, for me, it was like, okay, what can I get passionate about? You know, I can just get passionate about being with smart people and cool people, but mostly it's about coming up with ideas. It's, for me, business is like a hobby. Like a lot of people say, well, what do you do for fun? I'm like, business, because I enjoy it. And I enjoy studying it and thinking about it and experimenting with it. And yeah, when I still have other hobbies. I love nature. I love going out and being outdoors and things like that. But when it comes to, what do I think about when I'm not, working? I think about business ideas, business models, like, oh, that's a really cool idea, or that's a technique that somebody used that I hadn't thought of before, or I have an idea, I want to go validate it, right? So I think a lot of it depends on what's your calling, what are you passionate about? And there's so many fields, and I think especially for young people today, is like how do you deselect things because there's so many avenues you could pursue, and with AI there's so many things that could get really interesting but also a little confusing too, because there will be disruption in the workforce, and jobs that people do today are going to dramatically change as well. So yeah, that's another. But I say fundamentally, just study the wave, study the beach you want to be on, decide, is if I got to spend my entire rest of my career, or think of the beach analogy. If I got to live on one beach, which one would I want to live on if I could build a house there and watch the waves? That's another way to frame it. And if you're not
Mm.
feeling that calling for that market or that industry, then go look for another beach. It's almost as easy as that.
So the beach analogy, I never thought of it like that. Hmm. Hmm. I guess another question was like the latest before Imagine AI Live, you were CPO at, and I saw the employee count is over 10,000 employees. So it's a pretty
Yeah.
big company. So I'm curious, like, how is it like being a chief officer in a large company like that? How do you go about managing your things? And
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
it's,
it's it's it can be a challenge. There is a so I've been in all different environments, and the ones I enjoy the most are the smaller companies, the ventures, the startups, the building, the small, medium-sized businesses to me are, um, where I have the most fun, because usually there's less there's less politicking, there's less bureaucracy that's set in. Large companies are very interesting. So the reason I was in that role was because their company, it's a company called Barry Waymiller, based out of St. Louis, global industrial machine manufacturer, all kinds of packaging converting machines. The reason I was there was because they acquired my company about 7 years ago, and then I was in various roles, various leadership roles for them as we integrated my company into their company. And then eventually that shifted to me helping them with innovation on digital strategies, digital products like Internet of Things, or IoT as people call it. And then that led me into a role that was an enterprise role for essentially a $3.5 billion global company. And the great part about that is you've got this playground of all these different business lines and products that they have. So it was really a lot of great people out there that were looking to do more cutting edge things. And I was kind of like a bit of an entrepreneur in residence, as well as much as I was a technologist in residence with them. A lot of it was just sort of working and advising groups on how to, hey, this strategy would probably work really well with your product line, and here's how we could pitch it to customers. So a lot of it was working on product market fit, what to build. But the harder thing with a big enterprise like that is there are a lot of politics that gets in it. There's just different people, that different forces at play, where some people don't want to move as fast. I was running into that a lot. Especially with something new like AI. There's this. You can imagine driving a car. Most of the time, you either have your foot on the gas or the accelerator, or you have your foot on the brake. But usually, you don't have them both on at the same time. Well, working with new tech, especially in a more conservative industry space, oftentimes it feels like you're driving with one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas, or one foot on the accelerator. And
Mm.
it can be hard to do. So a lot of the ideas that I felt like we could go after faster as a chief product officer for this digital service product line, we just weren't able to resource. We weren't able to get enough support. And part of it was budgeting. Part of it was also, oh, it was, if you were running a small mid-sized company, to be a disruptor, it would be a yes, yes, yes all day long. But if you're running a big global industrial company, it's sort of like, well, let's go study that problem a little bit more, or let's wait till we get budget, or it's there's some big differences. So one of the reasons why, and all of these companies are going to need to go through this transition. They're going to, especially with AI, you can't ignore it now. It will happen to you. And much like humans that are using AI tools are going to outperform humans that don't, and start to replace them, businesses and enterprises that use AI tools will begin to outperform and replace those that don't too. So, I've often been wired with sort of a sense of urgency that, okay, we don't want to be a laggard here. We want to be on the cutting edge of this, and at the forefront of it. And that's with big enterprise. Sometimes that experience, if you're with a culturally conservative company, can be harder to get your ideas implemented than it would be. Let's say you work for a tech software company. Now it's they still have procedures and budgets and gatekeepers for things, but they tend to be more growth oriented. So, anyways, very different industries have different sort of I guess flavors of what it means to be a large enterprise. So it's very hard to say working for a big company is always the same. It's going to be different depending on, and also depending on who the CEO is, who's running the company is so important, and what their goals are for the company. And I've worked with some fantastic CEOs, and I've worked for some that that have caused a lot of disruption and destruction, of business value. So a lot of that to your
Mm.
leadership and that goes for any company, any size company, your leadership and the quality of that leadership. And they really should be embodying several things. One is, obviously they need to have the skills to run, a company, and have proven themselves at doing that and growing. But they also have to have the inspiration skills. They have to be able to inspire people to do things. And that's a lot of people think that senior leaders, are just boss people around. You there, do that. That's the wrong way to. It's really about inspiring people to take an action. And if you can do that at scale, you've got a pretty good business.
And you mentioned you tried to implement so the AI wave. I'd love to go into Imagine AI Live. Like, what would you say are the biggest things you've learned about AI? Because it's funny because when I first met Chris, it was before the event actually, and then now you guys are hosting the second event. What would you say are the biggest things you've learned from the first event about AI that you previously didn't
Yeah.
know?
Oh yeah. Well, pretty much everything. Like, I mean, who would have thought? I mean, we all knew that AI was cooking. I mean, we all knew this artificial intelligence thing was happening in the back burner. Every year you heard about it, and it's been going on for years and decades. But you always thought, well, that's in the future sometime. That really doesn't play in the here and the now. Like, we got to do things the way we've always done them. Every year software gets a little bit better, computing power gets a little bit better, but no one was really anticipating this massive breakthrough that we got with large language models. Obviously the biggest one being OpenAI and ChatGPT. And I remember my first exposure. So I was in this role, helping this global enterprise come up with digital strategies, and I was interested in AI. I was interested in sort of the predecessor to ChatGPT, which was used for sales and marketing. They had some other models that people were beginning to use for those things. And I used to run marketing. Before I was the CPO, I was a chief marketing officer for another division of the company. And so we had already been experimenting with automation and using kind of early AI. It wasn't very good. Um, but anyways, I remember hearing about ChatGPT over Thanksgiving weekend in 2022, and I thought, oh my gosh, they just dropped this new thing. Well, nobody could get access to it. It was like literally, I think I got on the wait list like everybody else, and I waited a week or so. And it wasn't, I think, until maybe the first week of December that I finally got access to it and they approved my account. I remember just being absolutely like beside myself, elated, like, oh my gosh, I have access to ChatGPT, the new thing. And I went home, and my daughter, who's closer to your age, my college age daughter, uh, was at home, and I said, "Sweetheart, you've got to see this thing. This is unbelievable. You can chat, you can have it tell you stories, you can have it write things for you." And we stayed up all night just laughing about it, just like literally rolling on the floor. She was working as a medical scribe. She was looking to get into to go to medical school, so she was working for a doctor as a scribe. They write all the notes, and she was kind of getting bored of that job, and she wanted to resign. She's like, "Dad, can it write me a resignation letter?" And this is Chat GPT 3.5, or not even. It was the very first one they dropped. It might have been 3.5. Um, and it wrote this most amazing letter, and then you could tailor it, and you could write out. And so all of a sudden, we're exploring use cases like that we had never imagined. It literally, had we even thought of these things, a few months earlier, you couldn't have imagined it. And that's what really got me on this track to ultimately to Imagine AI Live, which is, I started thinking about how do businesses use this? How could we use what should a strategy be for a global company or even a small company or startup? What is your AI strategy? And that's why I kept asking that question to myself and others that I worked with, like, what is our AI strategy? And I started experimenting with a lot of my own ideas. And I've been a CEO. I've been involved in every operation of a company, from sales and marketing on the customer facing side to ops, to engineering, to HR, finance. Like I've basically played every single role at one time or another. And I'm techy enough so I know how to go deep if I need to. I wouldn't call myself a software engineer, but I've done enough software code writing in the past. So I knew, okay, this is really interesting. And that's what really got me going on this. And then I started thinking about how do we find other people that are trying to do these things, not the Silicon Valley people. They're great. They're natively using this stuff. They're 10xing their engineers, their software development process, their marketing process. They're at the cutting edge. But how do other businesses that are not in Silicon Valley approach this? And there wasn't a conference. There wasn't really anything that I could find that you could go to plug into that scene. It was all online. It was on Twitter X. It was on YouTube and Reddit and all these other. You had to get into these, follow people that were posting things. It was kind of a messy process. Well, back to my earlier thing, which is one of the greatest hacks I can ever recommend, is go to conferences. There wasn't one that was on AI for businesses, and then the idea popped in my head last summer, like, well, why don't we just create one? Why don't we create the conference that we want to go to and see if we can get other people to want to come in with us and that want to get these ideas faster, these unlocks faster, and keep up with the pace of AI development, which is very hard to do. I mean, if you go on vacation for 2 weeks, it's like you missed 2 years of a normal tech cycle with AI. So how do you keep your anxiety level down, and not miss something? So that was really the genesis moment for Imagine AI Live. And then basically, by the time we ran our first event, it did so well that it became the new thing, and it became for me like a release valve because the enterprise I was working with wasn't. They were doing some cool things. They were following some of the ideas we came up with to use AI, and they're doing an awesome job, but they weren't going at the pace that I wanted to go because I knew there was a lot more we could go do. So Imagine AI Live became kind of an outlet for me to experiment with ideas on a different scale and go do things faster. And now it's a self-standing company. It's a new company, but it's off to the races, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, Chris told me a similar story, and then he reached out to you, and then you guys, the podcast you guys have been doing have been like, I actually got inspired by it, so I hosted, I think, two AI meetups in South Korea as well. Uh, to kind of just discuss what's about AI. And I guess what would you say like specific things you learned from maybe like one of the guests I interviewed was Lars. He was on your show. He was on the conference as well. What would you say like some
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
specific implementations that was like the most craziest thing you saw
Oh
from the
man.
conference?
Well, this is one of the great things about the conference is we brought so many cool people on the cutting edge, like Lars and many others like him. Were building companies or they were influencers in the AI space, like Ole Lehman out of Germany or Cyprus, actually, where he usually hangs out. Linus Ekenstam is a Swedish guy living in Barcelona. You had Javi Lopez and his partner who were from Spain. And just, we drew all these and we brought really cool company founders together. And part of this is why I love this cross pollination is that you get ideas from everybody. Everybody starts like making music, AI music together, like in not in a literal sense of writing music, but like, oh, I just did this really cool automation, or I created this really cool prompt, or here's a use case. And a lot of the use cases right now are very clever prompting techniques. All kinds of there's, and you can obviously read about these online. There's all these different, chain of thought, there's, having using specific words for a language model to tell it it is vital that you help me because I could get fired if I don't do this. It's a lot of psychology that goes into it. And I guess that was what really got me interested was that the amount of success you could have with a very successful prompt versus a basic prompt, like what you could do. And one of my first like personal AI unlocks was creating prompts that would actually help me do what I was doing faster, in just a fraction of the time. Um, Generating creative ideas, creative ad copy, for example, for an idea, um, or image generate. I got really into. Everybody always wants to be an artist, but most of us don't. We're not talented enough. So I really went down the mid-journey path at one point, and I'm like, this is insane. But I needed a way to create better prompts, and then I went to large language models like ChatGPT and Claude to help engineer the better prompts. Then I would feed them into a tool like Midjourney, which is still my favorite, but there's a lot of really good ones out there right now. And I guess it was bringing all these people together, like you probably did for your meetup, is like you're meeting people that are working on different components of the cutting edge of AI. They're working on simulated avatars, at Simly, and then you've got other people that are working on, you know, uh, AI agents, language model platforms on private knowledge, and then you've got other people that are working on automation, tying the pipeline of things together to get rid of all the toil that you have in your day. I mean, you can imagine being a podcast host and editing. There's a lot of steps, and it can get tedious at times. What if you could automate more of that process, that pipeline or workflow? It all gets it's To me, that's
Mm.
why we created the conference, because all these ideas are worth exploring. And when you bring these people together, their ideas feed on each other. But so much of it goes back to being, especially when you're working with large language models and image diffusion models and video gen models, a lot of it is the quality of the prompt you put in. And there's the term prompt engineer that's being widely used now, but I think it goes to another level. It's actually prompt artistry. Like, if you become, let's say, a musician or something, there's a level that you reach where, and I'm not one that can brag, so I can play a few chords on a guitar. That's like basic prompting. Um, you know,
Yeah.
uh, Now you go up to like Eric Clapton level, or name any music genre. You're great guitarists. They're artists. I'm not an artist. I'm a guy playing around with a few chords. They're artists. And I think what's going to happen with AI is you're going to have this level of prompt mastery that approaches on artistry. How do you get the most out of a language model? How do you unlock its hidden layers through persuasion and chain? Like how do you literally riff on a model, right? And I think today you have all these award ceremonies. You see, you have the Oscars for motion pictures, you have the Grammys for music. You have all these things, and they're around the world. I think there's going to be an award ceremony for prompt artists that literally come together every year that are celebrated for some of the unlocks and how they've changed humanity, how they've really improved things. at a much greater level because of their mastery of how to prompt these models. And that's really a new skill. And at some point, you can use the models to help you prompt. Like, so you can actually riff on, it's almost like becoming an electronic music producer at some point too, because you don't necessarily have to craft them out of your mind all the time. You can actually get inspiration from a model itself to write me a better prompt that I can use over here. And then you become more like a music producer, an EDM DJ or something like that. But I think those are going to be celebrated, sort of prompt producers, prompt artistry, and ultimately Imagine AI Live. One of our goals is to kind of be one of the driving forces behind that, and awards and celebrating what's happening with AI.
I think we can already like see the effect of prompt engineering because I saw Entropic and they had like a listing job for prompt engineering. It's like $300,000 a year. And I was seeing the requirements and it was like because AI is so new, it's like 1 year of machine learning experience or something like that. But I was like, wow, for for prompt engineering. So I guess that kind of
Yep.
shows.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's it's great that you bring that up. And having some of these hard skills, like knowing machine learning, is going to make you a great prompt engineer, but also knowing psychology and machine learning together is going to make you an even better prompt engineer, better prompt artist. And here's the funny thing. I find this fascinating, and I actually mentioned this when we opened up the first Imagine AI Live opening remarks. You were a prompt artist before AI, and so was I. And the reason is we had parents, and parents were the other intelligence. They weren't artificial, but they were intelligences that we had to interact with when we were born. And so we had to learn pattern recognition and pattern prediction. So if you smiled as a baby a certain way, your mom might have given you more attention, or your dad might have given you a toy, you know. And as you get older, you learn that you have to persuade these other intelligences. They're your parents, they're people in your life. Maybe it's a girlfriend or your friends. You have to persuade them to do things. And to me, one of the greatest unlocks I had is that we've all been prompt artists our whole lives. We just don't know it yet. And when you interact with these large language models, a lot of the skills that you're using to just be persuasive, to get the thing that you're trying to get in that moment, or the strategy of things you're trying to play out, and you can use a lot of that same strategy with actual prompt engineering. So psychology is as important as the hardcore machine learning as well.
I guess this is right now I'm toiling. There's like I want to implement AI. There's so many things I want to build with AI, like businesses. What would you say are some businesses that you're most excited about or ideas that incorporate AI that you think are going to have great potential in the future?
Yeah, I think there's one side of me is like, does the world need another AI company? Like right now, there's so many, they're coming out all the time. But you could say the same thing. Does the world need another song? Does the world need another movie? Like, yeah, we do. Because we're always building. Human nature is to create things, and so we're all creators inherently, and we all want to learn and discover things, and we all get the satisfaction when we do that, when we do kind of all of it together. And so, how do you focus on what to build? I think you gotta at some point you have to be so passionate about it, solve some problem for you, that you know that if it solved your problem, you could instantly get your friends using it, or it could help other people. You maybe have to think about it at that level. Like for us building Imagine AI Live as a conference, if it can help me, it can help other people like me. That was kind of the premise there that's starting to work, right? And when you build, let's say you want to build an app or a software platform or SaaS product or something like that, it's like, what problem can you solve that you're experiencing that you could imagine other people are too? And if you can solve it sort of at least maybe in a very early MVP level, uh, if you can stitch it together and it's like, oh my gosh, and then you start smiling. When you're smiling, you're onto something. If you're like, ooh, this is going to be good, then you can start thinking about it as a business. Okay, how would I create an actual product, put it out in the wild, and get other people to start using it? And then I think one of the earliest, greatest things you can do is get early customers, because the moment you get validation, is this the right from real customers that are on your platform, they're giving you feedback. They're telling you, hey, I like it, but man, it would be great if you added this. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go do all those things, because you have different profiles of people potentially using your product. But if it resonates with you, if it aligns with your idea, You're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's add some of this in there. And I think that's how you do it. It's very organic, I think is a great way to build a company, unless you have like massive resources, lots of capital and investors willing to write you checks. But usually that's not the case. And usually if they do, that's also like a thing that could get you in trouble. If you could build a company literally from a bootstrap mindset, if how fast can I start charging real money for this product or service and get customers that tell other customers about it, and then sort of structure my back end costs so I'm able to see a see this sort of line to profitability. I'm riding a wave and I can see the beach, and I know I want to get on that beach, right, and not wipe out. That's I think a good approach.
And can you take that bootstrap mentality to like your previous startups are like building machines, like very expensive machines. Can you take that approach to it? Like, or how do you go
Mm-hmm.
about using that approach to those companies? Because I always think it's so much money.
Well, a lot of these big machine companies started as small companies. I mean, when you think about it, like my own company started that way. And literally, you grab an engineer or two, and there's the two most important things that any young company can do, whether you're going to build software or hardware or a service, you're creating a service for people. Um, there's only two ways you can make money. One is by, well, maybe three. One is by selling your product. You have to get a customer. So selling your product is one way. Uh, Selling your stock, selling shares in your company is the other way. So you can actually sell, your product becomes your idea and you go get investors. But now you have people hanging around that probably want to get involved with you. So you try not to do so much of that. You want to be the shareholder yourself and bootstrap as long as you possibly can. I think you hear this advice a lot, and I've been through it. Um, Before you have to start answering to lots of shareholders that expect different returns and different expectations. The third way you can raise money is by borrowing money. And so, going to friends and family, hey, I'll pay you back. If I can't pay you back, I'll make you a shareholder, or you get some of the product for free. So those are kind of the three ways. But the most important one to me is selling the product and service, because that validates what you're trying to do. And people are actually willing to, they see enough value, they're willing to give you dollars or, euros or whatever currency, or they're willing to give you Bitcoin. It doesn't really matter. They're willing to give you something of value in exchange for it. And I think that mindset, go build a product. And so how do you build a machine company? Well, you have to have somebody who knows how to build machines. You get an engineer or two. And one of the ways you can leverage a new customer, if you go to a customer, I have this idea for a machine because we've drawn up the drawings and the specs, we've modeled it. I can show you a 3D model. We just need somebody to buy it. And if it really solves the problem for them in a way, and this is exactly what happened in the story I told you about this guy, Rob Dunk at Serigraph, and my partner, this is before I joined up. They sold them the first machine before they built it. They got the order. Then they used the money. It was a half
Oh,
a million dollars or something like that. And they spent half of it on parts, to build the thing and, rent to get a small building. And so they literally sold their way into the market. And to build it before you've sold it, especially if it's a bigger ticket item like that, it's very hard to do with you have to have, I think, a lot of experience, and your investors, whoever's writing you the money, or if you're putting, you have to have a huge amount of confidence in what you're doing. And so those are like second, third time founders, I think, are going to be more in those situations where they're going to build before they sell it. First time founders, you want to sell it first and then kind of move your way.
and I guess like when like throughout your journey, like what would you say? Because I am like starting the story, the journey that you have been through. You've gotten companies acquired. Like I want to do that and building this large conference. What would you tell your 17 or just like me, a 17-year-old founder? What would you say are things in the journey ahead that you would give advice for?
Yeah, I'd say
Just
several
like
things.
or
Yeah, yeah. Like number one, believe in yourself. Okay, you're here in this world for a reason. A lot of people get down on, oh, life sucks, reality sucks. You're here for a reason. And the reason is you're supposed to do something in your life. You're supposed to create something, build something, be a part of something, help something. And I think when you sort of set your thoughts on that, then believe in your ability to imagine what you can do. and I use the word imagine quite frequently when I describe this, is um, if you can imagine yourself in a few years from now, um, in great detail, doing something you totally enjoy and love doing, I call that a future memory. So it's actually, so we often think of memory going backwards. Like, so you think, oh yeah, I had this experience a year ago. It's great vacation, great time, great friends. And you have these vivid memories of those things. You also have memories of things that maybe weren't so pleasant. Maybe you had some setbacks, or you got in fights with some friends or something like that. And a lot of times, if you dwell on those negative things, you're going to probably get stuck in those negative things. But if you dwell on these really great experiences you've had, those are just past memories. So a future memory is your imagination, and a future memory is imagining your memory forward. And the more vividly you can do it, it's like it's already happened. And then it manifests. It literally starts to manifest itself because you start behaving and acting in that way. It's not an I want, I want, I want. It's I can imagine doing this and feeling what it feels like to be the CEO of this thing, and creating this product, and like, oh, it's gonna be awesome. We're talking to all these people. I'm up on stage at Imagine AI Live telling my story, and you start resonating. You literally put something out. This may sound a little woo woo, but it to me it's very real. You put this energy out into the field that this is my intention. This is what I want to become, not what I need, want, not a needy thing, but you imagine what can you become, and you start treating it like a future memory that you're working towards, but it's just as vivid as a past memory. And just like it doesn't help you to dwell on negative past memories, it doesn't help you to dwell on negative future memories. So if you project yourself and think, oh, I might fail, oh, I could lose my money, or, if you start imagining your future like that, well, that's probably going to be what you're going to greet. So you need to imagine these, this sort of wonderful memories like you would imagine a vacation that you're on. That's a trick. That's a great hack to being an entrepreneur, believing in yourself. So I would tell my 17-year-old self, imagine doing these things, imagine how big they could become, how many people you could touch. Don't worry about the negativity. And of course, it's always easier said than done. You're going to run into obstacles. This is another thing I would tell myself. Those obstacles, don't get so hung up on the things that happen, that oh, it's a setback. I was hoping this would happen and that happened instead. uh, Everything is a learning moment. So you ought to be blessed and thankful that, oh, I learned from something. I didn't expect to have that lesson. Maybe you lost money, or you took a bad decision, or you spent too much time on something that wasn't valuable. Um, I can learn from that. You were supposed to learn that lesson. And so you have to kind of greet everything that unfolds for you as a either part of something you're supposed to learn, or it's part of this sort of natural, riding this wave of your imagination forward, which is a future memory. And uh, and then keep persevering. That's the other thing I always would tell myself is, even if you have a bad day, this is a great argument for having a business partner too. People that try to do it solo, especially the first time, it can be lonely. You're going to have a bad day, whether you like it or not. Even if you're the most positive person on the planet, you're like, oh, nothing's going right today. And you know what I'm talking about. Like, it just, nothing feel like, you feel like you got nothing done. You actually took a step backwards. Well, having a business partner is great because they might be having a great day, and they could say, hey, come on, Elam, like, we're actually all right, man. Slap, slap. Like, let's get up and go. Like, we can do this. Imagine it kind of like you're running a marathon, and you're getting winded, but the other guy isn't, and that you sort of talk each other through it. That's one of the most important things about having a business partner, is allowing you to go through that journey, and to get you through some of those rough patches, because it just like the stock market is never up and right constantly. It's always a wave. It's always going like this. And business is like that. Being in business life is like that. And just knowing that you've got people that they, one of the greatest things my partner Hans used to tell me, if I was having a bad day, and he could tell it, we got to know each other so well, he'd say, hey, he goes, I have some news that is going to put a smile on your face. And all of a sudden, just the idea that he has something positive to tell me, I don't even know what it is yet, In my mind, I'm thinking, well, maybe he just closed a big order, and we got a big customer. Um, I just all of a sudden I would go from here to here, and like, oh yeah, tell me the news. I want to know the good news. And it might have been that just he had a great conversation with a guy that might buy, or a company that might buy from us 6 months from now, or something else. But um, it was that kind of thing where you can put smiles on each other's faces and help each other through those things. That would be something I would tell myself. Trying to think, create. Don't stop creating. Don't stop building. If you ever get, this is another piece of advice. Um, a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to do this so that I can retire early. Then I can just go sit on a beach and I can just, life is easy at that point. I don't have to worry about anything. I got money in the bank. And, a lot of people get, and at that age, I was kind of motivated. I want to go on the beach. I just want to make a bunch of money, go on the beach. The problem is, even if you have all the resources and money in the world, if you just sit on the beach, after a while you get kind of bored. It's like, okay, it's beautiful here, but you get called back to the thing that makes us human. And I think it goes back to the core reason why we're all here. That regardless of what religion you come from or what your belief systems are, we're all creators. And so we have this natural yearning to create. 1,000 years ago, we were creating for survival. We were creating things so that we wouldn't perish. Um, but now there's so much more about, art, life, beauty. You can create beautiful things. You can create things that make other people's lives easier, more efficient, products and services. You can create art for yourself, music for yourself. This act of kind of creating is very important. And the other act is learning, so constantly learning about those things. And then but the third aspect is you do need time on that beach. You can't just go 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 and never sit on the beach for a little bit, or as I like to do, maybe have a nice cigar, and just take it all in, enjoy that moment, be meditative. So life is about rhythm, and if you can take those three things, creating things, learning, constantly learning, and then I call it sort of like celebrating or enjoying, relaxing. Relaxing into smiling about the things that you've done, and imagining the next things that you want to go do. And but give yourself a break as well. That's a very important piece of advice. Maybe I'll stop there and I'll ask you, am I hitting some
Yeah.
useful things? But these are top
Yeah,
of the
it's
mind.
very useful. I just wanted to mention one quote because when you were mentioning relaxing, I've been kind of this quote is it's a French quote and it's basically life is not about running away from the storm. It's about learning to enjoy the rain or learning to dance with the rain. And it's kind of like what you're talking about, meditative. You continue going. Um, because I think one of the thing is I never tried to build when I was younger. Like I tried to build, but I always kind of um gave up. I didn't persevere hard enough. So I guess that part is like added advice that's very helpful because I think your passion gets somewhere and then you need to sometimes you get sometimes a little tough and it's a little hard. So I built a small community of founders around me. Like your advice, a lot of people gave me that advice. So I did that and now it's like whenever things get tough, I call with someone and then he's usually having a bad day. He's usually having a good day. So then it
Yeah.
makes me to have a good day. If he has a bad day, that's unfortunate. So I just try to find
Yeah,
someone
then you're
else.
both like, oh, let's
But
just meet at the bar and we'll just drink our sorrows away.
yeah.
But I'm glad you're seeing that
Yeah,
pattern
those
already.
Steve, I'm so thankful for your time. The podcast has been great. I'm really excited for the Imagine AI Live. I wish I could join. Once I get into the States, I will join one of the events. And
You will
yeah,
be
thanks for
invited.
everything you do and thank you for the time.
Thank you, thank you, and we will invite you, standing invitation to come to any of our Imagine AI Live conferences and events, and hopefully we'll bring one to Seoul, to South Korea. We've got I have a
Yeah.
co-founder there, so it makes logical sense that we would plan one there at some point too.
Yeah. I've been telling Chris, like, can we host one? Because I've been hosting one. I'm like, because he can host large conferences and I've always wanted to host one. I just don't know how to host one that's over 100 people. So, um, yeah, really excited for
Yeah,
that. And thank you so much for your
it's
time,
just
Steve.
yeah. No, this is great. Thanks so much for having me on. Look forward to seeing what you're building with your ventures and your podcast.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
And I guess
Have a good